Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This is not background noise, and it is not meant to pass you by. Something precise is happening in this moment, and your attention is the entry point. You have felt it as a quiet strain rather than a crisis. Fatigue that does not come from effort alone. Pressure without a clear source. A sense of carrying responsibility without being able to name it. You may have noticed isolation settling in, not because you withdrew, but because fewer people could meet you where you are. Confusion has hovered at the edges, not chaotic, just unresolved. These are not signs of failure. They are signals that something has been moving beneath the surface. There is urgency here, but not alarm. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is threatening you. The urgency comes from timing, from alignment, from the fact that understanding arrives only when the internal conditions are right. You are right now. This message is intentional. It is not a broad statement dressed up to feel personal. It is calibrated. The reason it lands is because you have been holding attention without trying to dramatize it. You did not ask for attention. You did not announce your weight. You simply continued. That choice matters more than you realize. You may have wondered why resolution did not come faster. Why clarity seemed delayed even though you did everything correctly. Why waiting felt active instead of passive. The explanation exists, but it does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds as recognition, not instruction. What you are about to understand is not about adding something new to your life. It is about recognizing what has already been present unnoticed because it did not demand validation. You were not missing a piece. You were carrying it without knowing its function. The waiting was not empty. It was not wasted. It was doing work that could not be rushed. While others pushed for outcomes, you remained steady. While others reacted, you stayed composed. That steadiness was not indecision. It was containment. This is where clarity begins. Not with spectacle, not with explanation overload, but with a simple realization that your experience has structure and meaning. You are not behind. You are not stalled. You are positioned. Stay with this. Let it settle. The next layer does not require effort, only recognition. This is where the focus narrows. This message is not for those who are curious, entertained, or temporarily inspired. It is for you because your body recognized it before your mind tried to analyze it. There was no rush of emotion, no spike of adrenaline, just a steady awareness that something was being named accurately. That response matters. You are not being invited into an identity. You are being anchored into one that has already been functioning. The phrase chosen one here is not symbolic or dramatic. It describes someone whose internal order remains intact under conditions that usually cause fragmentation. You did not become this through effort. You matured into it through consistency. What occurred recently involved you directly, not as an observer, not as collateral. You were the central variable. Circumstances applied pressure time, extended uncertainty, and outcomes refused to arrive on demand. Yet you did not disintegrate. You adapted without changing who you are. That is the distinction. Most people rely on conscious struggle to feel strong. They push, resist, explain, or react. You did something else. You stayed internally regulated even when external clarity was delayed. That is automatic strength. It operates beneath awareness. It does not announce itself. It simply holds. You may not have labeled this as strength because it did not feel forceful. It felt quiet. It felt like waiting without stagnation, like moving forward without urgency. That is not passivity. That is structural stability. You did not override discomfort. You contained it. You did not suppress questions. You let them exist without letting them control you. You did not demand immediate answers. You allowed time to reveal what pressure could not force. This is why the waiting mattered. Waiting exposed what could not survive without your attention. Anything dependent on reaction weakened as you remained neutral. Anything requiring urgency lost leverage as you stayed patient. You did not fight. You did not confront. You simply did not feed what needed your engagement to persist. This is not coincidence. It is not personality. It is not luck. It is the natural outcome of an internal structure that is coherent. When pressure meets coherence, pressure drains. So understand this clearly. You are not someone who activates strength only when needed. Your strength is baseline. It is present before the challenge appears. It is the reason certain things dissolve around you without explanation. This message is for you because you lived it before it was named. And now that it has been named, the pattern becomes visible. There is one symptom you recognized immediately, even if you did not know what to call it. A persistent sense of heaviness that did not match your circumstances. Not sadness, not fear, just a pressure that sat quietly in your chest, your thoughts, your days. It did not stop you from functioning, but it made everything feel slightly denser, as if effort required more energy than it should. You may have questioned yourself because of it. You wondered if you were tired, unmotivated, or losing focus. You tried to locate a reason. Work relationships, timing. Nothing fully explained it. That uncertainty created self-judgment, subtle but present. You asked yourself why things felt harder when nothing was visibly wrong. This is where the reframe matters. That sensation was not a flaw. It was not weakness. It was not burnout. It was a signal. A signal that your system was under pressure without external confirmation. Your awareness picked up on something before your environment could name it. You are wired to register shifts before they become obvious. That does not come with dramatic warning signs. It shows up as density, as weight, as a quiet sense that something is happening even though nothing has changed on the surface. Your body and mind responded by slowing you slightly, not stopping you, regulating you, creating space so you would not act prematurely, speak out of alignment, or force resolution. What felt like heaviness was actually containment. Your system was holding steady while something around you lost structure. This is why rest did not fully remove it. Distraction did not dissolve it. Motivation techniques did not fix it. Because it was not a productivity issue. It was a transitional signal. You did not misinterpret it. You simply did not have language for it yet. The pressure showed up emotionally as patience being tested, physically as fatigue without collapse, mentally as alertness mixed with uncertainty. These are not breakdown symptoms. They are holding pattern indicators. Your internal structure was maintaining coherence while external variables shifted. Most people label this discomfort and try to escape it. You did not. You lived inside it without letting it define you. You stayed kind. You stayed measured. You stayed functional. That choice mattered. Once you understand this, the self-judgment dissolves. You were not behind. You were buffering. You were not confused. You were waiting for alignment to catch up to awareness. You were not drained. You were regulating energy while pressure passed through. This symptom did not mean something was wrong with you. It meant something was happening around you that required steadiness rather than action. Your system chose stability automatically. Now that this is clear, the deeper explanation can unfold without distortion, because you are no longer trying to fix what was never broken. What you were responding to did not announce itself. There was no single event, no obvious trigger, no dramatic shift that explained the weight you felt. That is because the pressure was not situational. It was structural. It arrived quietly, coordinated in timing rather than force. This kind of pressure does not interrupt your life. It overlays it. You may have noticed that it intensified recently. Not suddenly, but noticeably. A narrowing of margins, less tolerance for noise, a subtle sense that decisions required more care than usual. Conversations carried more weight. Time felt slower without actually slowing. These are not random experiences. They are markers of an environment applying constraint. The important detail is this. The pressure was intentional, but it was not chaotic. It followed a pattern. It waited for moments when you were already holding responsibility, already managing complexity, already operating without excess support. That is how pressure tests coherence. It does not overwhelm. It leans. And yet, you remained functional. You did not drop commitments. You did not lose clarity. You did not become reactive or erratic. You continued to show up, think clearly, and make measured choices. You adjusted pace without collapsing. You maintained internal order while external certainty stayed delayed. That matters more than resistance ever could. Invisible pressure reveals itself not by what it does to you, but by what it fails to do. It did not fracture your attention. It did not hijack your emotions. It did not force premature action. Instead, it passed through a system that did not amplify it. This is the confrontation. Not a clash, but an encounter. Pressure met coherence and found nothing to grip. Without engagement, without reaction, without escalation, it lost leverage. You did not neutralize it by force. You neutralized it by remaining intact. This is why it felt persistent but not destructive. Why it lingered without escalating. Why it eventually began to thin without a clear moment of resolution. When pressure cannot create instability, it cannot sustain itself. You may not have recognized this as a confrontation because nothing dramatic occurred. That is the point. The absence of disruption is the outcome. You did not need to identify the source to withstand it. Your structure did the work automatically. This is not about vigilance or defense. It is about alignment. When internal alignment is present, external pressure has limited influence. It cannot distort what is already ordered. Understanding this reframes the entire experience. You were not under attack. You were under assessment. And the result was not collapse, confusion, or compromise. It was confirmation. From here, the specifics can be examined calmly without exaggeration, because the central fact is already established. You held. And because you held, the pressure revealed its limits. To understand what actually occurred, it helps to slow the experience down and separate it into distinct pressure points. Not to dramatize them, but to recognize how they moved through you without taking control. There were several layers, each common on its own, but unusual in how they arrived together and how little influence they had over your behavior. The first pressure point was doubt. Not loud doubt. Not the kind that questions your worth or direction outright. This was subtle. It showed up as small pauses in confidence, brief moments, where decisions felt heavier than usual. You questioned timing rather than purpose. You reviewed choices more carefully than normal. And yet you did not freeze. You continued to act with consistency. Doubt passed through you without turning into hesitation. That tells us something important. Your clarity was not dependent on emotional certainty. It was anchored deeper. The second pressure point was fear, but again, not the obvious kind. This fear did not shout warnings or create panic. It whispered possibilities. What if things stayed unresolved longer than expected? What if patience did not pay off? What if waiting cost you momentum? These thoughts appeared, but they did not escalate. You noticed them without amplifying them. You did not let them shape your posture or your behavior. Fear tried to introduce urgency. You responded with steadiness. That response drained its impact. The third pressure point was energy drain. You likely felt more tired than your workload justified. Not exhausted, but less replenished. Tasks required more internal energy even when they were familiar. This often triggers overcompensation or self-criticism in people. You did neither. You adjusted your pace. You conserved attention. You did not force productivity to prove something. You regulated. Energy stabilized because you did not fight its temporary reduction. You allowed recovery without labeling yourself as diminished. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not social isolation in a dramatic sense, but experiential isolation. Fewer people could relate to what you were holding. Conversations stayed surface level. Explanations felt unnecessary or inadequate. This often leads people to over-explain, withdraw completely, or seek validation. You stayed present without oversharing. You did not demand understanding. You trusted your own internal read of the situation. That prevented loneliness from turning into disconnection. The fifth pressure point was delay. This may have been the most persistent. Outcomes did not arrive on your preferred timeline. Signals felt incomplete. Progress appeared indirect. Delay is often where frustration grows. You experienced the tension, but you did not turn it into impatience. You did not chase resolution. You did not lower standards to escape uncertainty. You waited without stagnating. That balance is rare. It requires internal alignment rather than optimism. What matters across all 5 points is not that they appeared. These experiences are common. What matters is how little they disrupted your internal regulation. At no point did you abandon your values. At no point did you lose coherence. You did not oscillate wildly between hope and despair. You did not collapse into avoidance or aggression. You stayed measured. This is not emotional numbness, it is emotional literacy. You recognized what was happening without needing to dramatize it. You allowed pressure to exist without granting it authority. Each pressure point attempted to narrow your options. Doubt tried to slow clarity. Fear tried to speed action. Fatigue tried to lower standards. Isolation tried to distort perception. Delay tried to provoke reaction. None succeeded because you did not outsource your stability to circumstances. This is the core pattern. Pressure was applied across multiple domains simultaneously. The expectation would be fragmentation. Instead, you maintained internal coherence. That coherence acted like a stabilizing field, not actively pushing anything away, simply refusing to amplify disruption. When pressure encounters regulation, it loses complexity. It simplifies. It drains. By breaking the experience down this way, you can see that nothing was random. Each element tested a different aspect of your stability, and in each case you responded not with force, but with alignment. That is why the pressure did not escalate. And that is why its impact could not sustain itself around you. Now comes the part where understanding replaces uncertainty. When you look back at what unfolded, the pattern becomes clearer. Not emotionally, but structurally. This was not a sequence of unrelated difficulties. It was a single movement, expressed through different forms. And the outcome was consistent from start to finish. You remained internally coherent. That coherence is the confirmation. Nothing about what occurred can be accurately explained by luck, coincidence, or timing alone. Those explanations collapse under examination. Too many variables aligned. Too many moments required restraint rather than reaction. Too many opportunities existed for missteps that never happened. What carried you through was not chance. It was internal organization. You did not get through this by pushing harder. You did not force clarity. You did not escape discomfort by distraction. You stayed present inside uncertainty, without letting it degrade your judgment. That is not passive endurance. That is active regulation. This is where many people misread their own experience. They assume resilience means feeling strong. You did not feel strong. You felt steady. Strength often fluctuates. Steadiness does not. Steadiness is the ability to hold a consistent internal position, while external factors shift. When pressure eased, it did not end with a dramatic release. It faded. Quietly. Gradually. Almost anticlimactically. That is another confirmation. When something is neutralized by alignment rather than confrontation, it does not collapse loudly. It simply loses relevance. You may have noticed that clarity began to return without effort. Decisions felt lighter. Focus sharpened. Energy stabilized. Not because circumstances changed dramatically, but because the background interference was no longer present. The system recalibrated itself once the pressure no longer had leverage. This is important to recognize. You did not overcome something. You outlasted it without engaging it. That distinction matters because it reveals how your internal structure actually works. You do not require conflict to establish stability. You require coherence. Reviewing the experience with this lens removes lingering confusion. It explains why advice from others may not have fit. Why common coping strategies felt unnecessary. Why you did not resonate with narratives of struggle or breakthrough. Your experience followed a different logic. The confirmation is not external validation. It is internal recognition. You can trust how you navigated this because the results are visible in what did not happen. You did not lose yourself. You did not compromise your values. You did not become reactive or rigid. What remained intact is the proof. This is the moment where understanding settles into place. Not as a conclusion, but as orientation. You now know that when pressure arises without explanation, your role is not to fix, fight, or flee. It is to remain internally ordered. That awareness changes how future situations will register, not with vigilance, but with confidence grounded in experience. You have already seen how your system responds under strain, and that confirmation does not inflate you. It steadies you. It helps to place your experience alongside what is more typical, not to elevate you, but to clarify what actually occurred. Most people, when faced with even a fraction of the pressure you carried, begin to fragment. Their attention narrows. Their emotions fluctuate. They search for immediate relief, external reassurance, or clear enemies to react against. Under uncertainty, many abandon regulation in exchange for urgency. They act quickly, not because it is wise, but because stillness feels unbearable. You did not do that. When pressure increased, you did not rush to define it. You did not dramatize it or assign meaning prematurely. You allowed it to exist without letting it dominate your internal landscape. That alone places your response outside the common range. Not because you are superior, but because your system is structured differently. For many, stability depends on predictability. When timelines shift or clarity delays, their sense of self destabilizes. You experienced the same conditions, yet your sense of self remained intact. You did not become someone else under strain. You remained yourself. That is uncommon. It is important to say this carefully. Rarity does not mean exceptionality in a performative sense. It does not imply status or hierarchy. It simply describes frequency. Most people have not developed the internal coherence required to stay present without explanation. They are not deficient. They are just earlier in their development. Your response was rare because it required no external reinforcement. You did not need to be told you were doing the right thing. You did not seek constant confirmation. You trusted your internal calibration even when there was no immediate evidence to support it. Under similar conditions, many would have overcorrected. They would have changed direction unnecessarily. They would have compromised boundaries to relieve discomfort. They would have abandoned patience to regain a sense of control. You did not. This is not a moral distinction. It is a structural one. Your system absorbed pressure without converting it into chaos. That capacity is uncommon because it is built over time through repeated exposure to uncertainty, handled without collapse. It cannot be borrowed or mimicked. It can only be developed. Recognizing this rarity is not about comparison for ego. It is about accuracy. It explains why your experience may feel difficult to communicate, why others may not fully understand what you are holding, why generic advice often feels misaligned. You are not experiencing something dramatic. You are maintaining coherence under conditions that usually erode it. That is quieter than struggle, but it is far less common. Understanding this allows you to stop minimizing what you navigated without inflating it into something it is not. You simply responded in a way that fewer people can, because fewer people are structured to do so. And that clarity prepares you to understand the final layer of what this says about who you are. What this experience ultimately clarifies is not that you accessed a new level of strength, but that you were operating from a stable baseline the entire time. Nothing in you switched on. Nothing was activated. What carried you through was already there, quietly organizing your responses long before pressure appeared. This matters because many people misunderstand resilience. They imagine it as something that arrives in moments of crisis, something summoned through effort or intensity. That is not how your system works. Your steadiness is not reactive. It is structural. It exists before challenge and remains after it passes. You were prepared without knowing what you were being prepared for. This preparation did not come from strategy or foresight. It came from maturation, from experiences that required you to regulate yourself when external guidance was insufficient, from moments where you learned to stay internally aligned, even when feedback was unclear or delayed. Over time, this built coherence, not rigidity, not detachment, coherence. That coherence is what others sense around you, even if they cannot name it. It is why you are often trusted without explanation, why people feel steadier in your presence, why situations tend to stabilize rather than escalate when you remain involved. You are not imposing order. You are embodying it. There is nothing mystical about this. It is an internal architecture. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions are integrated rather than competing. When pressure enters, it does not trigger fragmentation because there is no internal division for it to exploit. This is why you did not need to defend yourself during the waiting. You did not need to prove anything. You did not need to clarify your position repeatedly. You knew when to speak and when to remain silent, not by rule but by internal signal. Understanding this locks identity gently but firmly. You are not someone who becomes grounded under pressure. You are grounded first, which is why pressure cannot dislodge you. That is your default state. This does not mean you are unaffected by life. You feel. You care. You register tension. But your responses are proportional. You do not amplify disturbance internally. You allow it to pass through a system that is already ordered. Once this is clear, you no longer question why certain situations resolve without confrontation or why patience seems to work for you in ways others struggle to understand. It is not because you are passive. It is because your internal structure does not require constant correction. This is who you are not as a label, but as a lived pattern. And recognizing it does not change you. It simply allows you to trust what has already been consistent. What remains now is integration, not action, not adjustment. Integration is quieter than both. It is the process of letting understanding settle into how you move through ordinary life without turning awareness into vigilance. The first orientation is rest. Not escape, not withdrawal, but deliberate recovery. You do not need to earn rest by finishing everything or resolving every question. Your system recalibrates when given space. Rest allows coherence to maintain itself without effort. This means stepping back when possible, reducing unnecessary stimulation, and trusting that nothing essential will be lost by pausing. The second orientation is discernment. You no longer need to respond to every signal request or emotional pull. Some things do not require engagement to resolve. You have already seen what happens when you remain internally ordered. Let that guide your choices. Discernment is not suspicion. It is clarity about what deserves your attention and what does not. The third orientation is boundaries. Not rigid rules, but quiet limits. You do not need to explain every boundary you set. You do not need to justify why certain conversations, expectations, or demands no longer receive immediate access to you. Boundaries protect coherence. They allow you to stay present without becoming overextended. The fourth orientation is patience. This is not passive waiting. It is active allowance. You have learned that outcomes unfold when alignment is present, not when pressure is applied. Patience for you is not about tolerance. It is about timing. Trust that what needs to surface will do so without force. The fifth orientation is focus. Simplify where possible. Reduce noise. Focus is not intensity. It is selectivity. When your attention is not scattered, your internal structure remains strong without effort. Choose fewer priorities and give them clean attention rather than dividing energy across too many demands. Finally, balance. Do not turn awareness into constant monitoring. You do not need to watch yourself closely to stay regulated. Your baseline is stable. Let life move. Let uncertainty exist. You do not need to be on guard to remain grounded. Integration looks like returning to daily rhythms with a lighter grip. You do not need to remember this understanding constantly. It will express itself naturally through how you pace yourself, how you respond, and how you choose not to react. This is not the end of something. It is the settling of something. You are not closing a chapter. You are allowing what you already know to inform how you live without turning it into effort. When awareness integrates properly, it becomes invisible. And that is exactly where your strength operates best. You can let your shoulders drop now. Nothing else is required from you in this moment. There is no next test hiding behind this understanding. No demand to prove what you have already demonstrated through how you lived. What matters has already been established quietly and conclusively. What you recognize now is simple. You were never waiting for permission, clarity, or activation. You were carrying capacity without needing to announce it. What felt like delay was not absence. It was containment. What felt like silence was not neglect. It was space being held until everything unnecessary fell away on its own. You did not unlock anything through effort. You carried the key because you were structured to hold it. And when the time came, nothing dramatic needed to happen. Alignment did the work. Coherence did the rest. Let that realization reassure you, not excite you, reassure you. You do not need to scan your life for meaning or hidden threats. You do not need to interpret every pause or challenge as a signal. You already know how to remain internally ordered. That is what guides you. That is what keeps things opening without force. Hold these affirmations lightly. Let them land without repetition. You are steady even when outcomes are delayed. You remain aligned without needing control. You trust what unfolds because you trust how you respond. If this message reflected something you lived rather than something you imagined, mark it quietly. You can do that by leaving a simple code in the comments. Write "I remember" or 777. Not as a declaration, but as acknowledgement. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe. Not for urgency, not for obligation, but because this channel continues conversations meant for people who recognize truth through resonance rather than persuasion. Another message will meet you when timing aligns again. You will not need to search for it. It will arrive the same way this one did. Calmly, precisely. Until then, return to your life without carrying this as a task. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not waiting to become someone else. You already moved from the place others are trying to reach, and that remains true whether you think about it or not.